I don't know if these are good enough. Morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Morning Briefing here on NoFilter.net, Caffeine TV, and the variety of other platforms that carry the show. I'm Jeff DeForest, a.k.a. Defo, along with one Mike Lubie Lubitz. Lubie looking good, although you got another haircut just when your hair was looking good. Are you under the directions and unfortunately the guidance of your wife, or are you doing this of your own volition? What's going on with that?
When it gets too long, I feel like I look like a shaggy dog. And I was like, no, we're trying to be professionals here. Also, be going away at the end of the week. So, ready to clean it up. I'm confused what you're doing, though.
Well, this is kind of Stevie Wonder time for me, but I'm not sure exactly how to approach this because where do you get the sunglasses that you need to look at the total eclipse
Oh,
that's
that's
taking place
today.
today?
Yeah, I know.
People are all over the place. Now, if you look up at the sun, and we mentioned this, I think we discussed this a little bit on one of the previous editions of the morning briefing,
Yeah.
and that is thank God my mother was wrong. Thank God. I love my mother. She lived almost to be 98 years old. Passed away a couple of years ago. Sweet lady. Drove me to all my Little League games. If I was late for work, she would just jump in the car and take me. If it was too late to take the train when I was growing up in New York, I was working selling souvenirs at Shea Stadium. She would drive me all the way to Flushing and then offer to pick me up if I couldn't catch the train coming back. A very, very sweet lady. But her contention was, I don't know, how old of a myth is this and how far-fetched is it that too much masturbation leads to blindness, Louis? You weren't just victimized by this syndrome, this myth that my mother was trying to convince me was true. But is it true that if you look up at this eclipse of the sun and you don't have what is it, some kind of film they put in cardboard to make the glasses? And where do you buy these, Louis? Do we have any idea where you get a pair?
Everyone, my family was talking about this weekend. My sister bought them on about it. She's a teacher, so I guess they'll be in school, and she bought a ton for her kids in the classroom. She's a kindergarten teacher, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have them, and I don't know
But this won't work. I mean, you think you're
think so.
protected. You look up at the
No.
eclipse, and the next thing you know, you're fucking blind. I don't know.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you're singing "My Cherie Amour." You look like the officials in that UConn game when they allowed Iowa to go to the finals because they had to, calling a moving screen at the end of the game. Now, everybody, the basketball purists, are all over this, Luby. I don't know how you felt about that. In the semifinal game, Iowa Hawkeyes are trying to get Caitlin Clark. I mean, what good would this Sunday game have been without Caitlin Clark in there going against South Carolina? If we knew that UConn was just going in there to be tagged with a routine loss because South Carolina is that good and not much better than the other women's teams, they went 38-0 for Christ's sake. So the likelihood that they were going to be upset in the championship game, fairly slim. Yet we knew that the only thing, the marquee, the value name, the only reason people were going to tune in was to see Caitlin Clark possibly, and I don't know, does she need to dignify her career by winning a championship to be considered among the greatest of all time? I never really liked that argument, Luby. I don't know how you feel about that.
Look, I think she's among the greatest of all time. To me, to be the greatest of all time, when we've seen women players win 2 and 3 and 4 titles, yeah, to me, she should have at least won one if you're really going to put her at the top of the list. No, she's obviously one of the greatest ever. What she did, I watched the second half of both the Final Four and the title game. I haven't watched women's basketball, period, in like 15
Exactly.
years. So she was a phenom, a phenomenon that is worthy of great credit. I just don't, the greatest ever. It's tough to me in a sport where we've seen the greatest of all time win 2, 3, 4 titles. For her to not win one, to me, it feels like her career is a little short.
But in general, everybody said the same thing, which I believe to be true, and that is that she upgraded the level of everybody else on her team. Phenomenal passer in the transition game. I mean, the way she throws those passes, it wasn't like an outlet pass, but she would get the initial pass coming in bounds and just send it down the court with great precision. That was a part of her game that wasn't really discussed a lot because everybody's infatuated and in love with the long ball, right? Chicks dig the long ball, and people who watch college basketball love seeing a girl who can line it up from 35 feet. Which Caitlin Clark more than did. In that UConn game, though, it sparked a lot of controversy about whether or not that foul should have been called. They call a moving screen on the UConn center with 3 seconds to go and UConn trailing by a point. Now, we had facetiously speculated that if the game was close and maybe had UConn been leading by 1 point, they probably would have thrown a couple of technicals on Gino, regardless of what he was doing. He could have had his back to the court And they would have gone ahead and lit him up with a couple of tees, allowed Caitlin Clark to go to the stripe to hit the game-winning free throws, and move on into the championship round. Because, as we said, otherwise, is anybody watching that? If that was UConn versus South Carolina, would the curiosity about Caitlin Clark have carried over? I would imagine there still would have been some people, and this was the good thing about all of this also, because it drew attention to the game. And as you said, Lubie, you would have never watched a women's college basketball game, regardless of the magnitude of the event and what was at stake there, in this case, a national championship, and a lot of other stuff in terms of legacy that goes along with it with Caitlin Clark. I'm not one that believes that you have to win a championship to be considered a great player. Greatest of all time? I mean, you might be able to work that kind of parenthetically into the argument. Dan Marino was either greatest of all time. Probably not. Well, was he a great player? Absolutely. Ernie Banks, greatest of all time? You could make a case for that. And maybe one of the reasons he doesn't get that consideration is because people didn't see him in a World Series. The Cubs didn't go to a World Series for like 110 years. Ernie Banks happened to come along at a time where it just wasn't happening. What, was he great? Absolutely. A shortstop with power, hit for average, moved over to first base. Just a tremendous player, never sniffed a championship. There are many that fall into that category, and there are many others that have multiple rings that you wouldn't give 2 cents for if you were the owner of a G League team. In basketball, Chuck Nevitt comes to mind. A lot of different angles to this argument, but I don't know. I think there's probably a handful of women players, and Caitlin Clark fits into the category with the Sue Birds, the Diana Taurasi's, the Candace Parkers, and the Lisa Leslie's, Rebecca Lobos. Belongs in the conversation. That's certainly true. Greatest of all time. I don't know that we really need to bestow that distinction on her just yet. And we'll see what happens. Will it be enjoyable? Will you be inclined to watch her? I would think that this will attract some attention, the way that this wave of enthusiasm and interest developed and evolved for women's college basketball over the last couple of months. And maybe this has been happening over the last year or so with Caitlin Clark. Yeah. I would imagine that would actually help shed a little bit of light on a league that is completely ignored for the most part, and that would be the Women's National Basketball Association. She's going to have to bring some illumination to that. And I kind of dig the phenomenon, too, when that happens. It happens once in a while. We see it sometimes briefly when a guy catches fire like Tommy Cutlets did this past year, where everybody, the whole nation is infatuated with Tommy DeVito, the quarterback for the Giants, came in, started a couple of games, won a couple of games. They weren't particularly works of art, kind of just grinding him out. I don't know that he was necessarily solely responsible or even close to being majority responsible for what was happening with the Giants. And as we said, unfortunately, that story fizzled out. People die in fairy tales too, as they said in Cinderella Man. And he went from endorsing Rayo's, and he couldn't even buy a jar of ragu after 4 or 5 games. Unbelievable, Tommy Cutler. So you don't like to say Lynn Sanity. Of course, that was a great story in New York, as you had Jeremy Lin lighting it up, and everybody was happy that Carmelo was out of the lineup. They were thinking, wow, we're a better team with this scrub. And he got himself a nice fat contract out of it. Never really developed into the player that he showed flashes of being during that red-hot period he had with the New York Knicks. But that story fizzled out. And yet it created a ton of attention. The whole country was talking about it. It was a so-called, and I never bought this either, Lubie, but remember, I don't know if this was happening when you were involved in the local media here, but it was not uncommon for the program director to tell you to stop talking about masturbation and talk about the things people are talking about at the water cooler. Who the fuck is talking about anything at the water cooler, Bobby? Have you ever stood by a water cooler and gone, hey, you know what? That was some game last night. Never, right? You go to the water cooler, you go, wait, you going to get something or what? Come on, let's go. I got no time. You don't have time to futz with people. Nobody's having these conversations at the water cooler, but certainly she brought a lot of attention to the sport. It was great, too, this Lisa Bluter, the coach of the Iowa Hawkeyes. Didn't she? I mean, would you swear she was Sister Jean? Lisa Bluter. And then she brought in that Hatchet Man. I guess it was like a transgender Rick Mahorn type. Allison O'Grady. I don't mean to apply anything negative about Allison O'Grady, but she literally brought in a goon to hack the living daylights out of Angel Reese of LSU. Nobody really talked too much about that. And then, of course, she takes them into the championship game, getting a great call. Well, what do you think? Should they make that call? I mean, I'm sort of a purist in this sense. I think if a call is a foul, if it's going to be called in the first minute of the game, it should be called in the last minute of the game, the same way.
Yes, I agree.
But rarely do you see, I mean, you'll see a lot of defensive fouls ignored in those situations. Rarely do you see a sort of, I don't know, I guess it was a moving screen. I don't know that anybody's arguing the mechanics of the call. But do you call that with 3 seconds to go? You rarely see that happen in the last 10 seconds of a ball game, especially one that has as much meaning as this one. And it denied UConn a chance to take either a game-winning or it would have been a game-winning shot. They were only down 1 point at the time.
Yes.
Even if they get to the stripe, they have the likelihood of at least sending this game in overtime if they don't win it outright. And instead, you get a whistle and a foul called that, I don't know, did Iowa, were they guilty of no moving screens in the game? They had no calls against them, whereas UConn had 3 or 4.
Look, I sort of do agree in the sense that, like, if it's a foul, it's a foul, right? Like, because then otherwise you're going to have guys just tackling guys at the rim, and that ruins the game itself too. But I was trying to remember, do they ever, like,
when do you see an offensive foul called in that spot?
Actions
away from the ball,
plays like that, and they never, I'm trying to remember what, because they were talking about the men's Final Four, and like there would down the stretch were plays like that, and they didn't call it. Like, you know, and no one even thinks about it. Like, no one would have thought. To me, look, if she gets in front and shoves the crap out of the girl, okay, fine, but she got set. And then I guess she had her arm weird, so like it caught her.
It would have to be really blatant. I'm with you.
Come on, like to me, like I was like, what are they doing? It was a.
What are they doing? They were following instructions, is what they were doing. What are you talking about? The fix was in, Lubie. If anybody thought that game was on the level after that call, you're flat out of your mind. Because there had to be already implanted in the head of these officials that anything you can do to help. And that's pretty much what they did. So they got into the final game. The women got their platform. They got their audience. Let's hope it does some good for the sport. It was kind of enjoyable to see all of this attention being paid to it overall, even if you're the largest and most huge of cynics about women's sports being on a parallel with men's sports. I don't think it's about that. I remember this. It stuck with me, Lubie. The great Pat Riley, who we consider to be an untouchable. Of course, we're here in the Miami market. Pat Riley's been a presence here for a long, long time. I happened to be working in L.A. when Riley took over the coaching reins of the Lakers and been following this guy's career forever. I couldn't have been more honored or thrilled, Lubie, as you know, to find out that Riley was a fan of our shows when we were on the radio here in South Florida. He even paid tribute to us with a special personal video he sent us after Lubie and I had been working together. We had this big thing we cranked up about a 10-year anniversary. Riley was more than willing to be a participant in this thing, even taking time where he didn't have a chance to be on our show. So he sent us like a private video, which was fantastic. Yep. I mean, one of these days we'll dig this thing up just to validate the fact that we're on the air now. I remember I was doing, one of my usual snarky comments about the WNBA, which I wasn't a giant fan of in the very beginning. I'm glad the women have an outlet for exhibiting their skills and being able to get paid here in the United States of America. They don't have to schlep off to some country and worry about getting frisked at the airport, maybe thrown in a Russian prison and the Gulag Archipelago for like the next 28 years. All for it. Very happy to see that the thing is still persisting and actually, I guess, has achieved some level of success. But I made some wisecrack about the WNBA and the quality of play. And Pat Riley says to me during the interview, he says, it's all about the game. It's not about this, that, or the other thing. Your elitist attitude about men being superior to women in the game. It's just about playing the game of basketball. And I thought, holy Naismith. I mean, he's right about that. So good to see all of this was happening. And that it transpired and seemed to be a very positive story, getting a lot of attention today, even on the national news platforms, as the men are set to play the championship game, which everybody, I don't know, I mean, as busted up as your bracket was, I mean, your bracket must have looked like Vito Antifermo's nose after the Hagler fight. First round of the tournament. And I think that's become like a kind of a matter of routine, isn't it, Lubie? You have to sort of guess at the upsets because there are going to be at least a handful of monumental upsets in the early rounds of the NCAA tournament. It's part of what makes it such a charming event to follow as a sports fan. But in the end, what do we have? We have UConn and Purdue, the two top teams in the country all year long. Yep. Interesting matchup. Now, we thought that DJ Burns versus Zach Edey was going to be an interesting matchup. It was a mismatch.
Yeah, we knew that. Well, we we thought it would be interesting to see, but in reality, figured it was going to be what we saw.
Giant mismatch, yeah.
Again, no shot.
Now this Klingon is a whole different story because the guy's 7'3", so you have 7'3" on 7'4", both talented players. Klingon a little bit more versatile than Zach Edey, but Zach Edey's been a pillar of strength. Purdue didn't even play well in an NC State game, and they still won by double digits. UConn also challenged early in their contest. First half, very similar. It was a tale of two cities there. First half, very similar to what happened in the Purdue game against NC State. And then in the second half, UConn dominated Alabama, pulled away, won by double digits, covered the 11.5-point spread. And many chalk players, I mean, holy milk of magnesia, many chalk players were extremely happy. The bookies are daring you to bet Purdue tonight, Lubie. Daring you. 6.5 points. It's an outrage, as the great Tony Bruno would say.
6.5, yeah.
6.5 points. What do you think? I mean, they're daring you to just say, hey, I've got to take this.
I lean Purdue. Look, Klingon is a tall guy, but he's not the size of Edey. Like, Edey's a much stronger dude than Klingon. Klingon's another one of those tall, really rail thin guys. I don't think he'll stay with Edey. Look, Purdue would have won by 30. The problem was their guards. Edey was a fucking monster in that game. Like,
yes.
If he touched the ball, either was going to score or he was going to make something happen. Problem was their guards sucked, and it wasn't that NC State's defense was so amazing. They just played bad. The Smith kid, who's one of the best, if not the country in assists, was dreadful. Had a ton of really stupid turnovers early, and then they were trying to force it to Edey from really weird angles, and eventually they were like, "All right, let's rotate it," and then NC State couldn't stop it. But they were being really impatient, and it was like, you're letting NC State hang around in a game that NC State has no shot at. Like,
seem to have no business being in that ball game. Cinderella again, the glass slipper, Pumpkin City, my friends. Have to tip our hat to Ronald Blanco of the Houston Astros. He pitched a no-hitter in his first start this year.
Nice.
And he goes into the sixth inning. He goes 5 2/3 of a no-hitter last night against the Texas Rangers. As this guy starts the season with 14 2/3 innings of no-hit ball. I think that's the longest streak to start a season ever in Major League history for a guy in his first couple of starts. He was starting to run out of gas there in the fifth inning, and then finally they took him out in the sixth, but ends up going 14 2/3 to start the season without allowing a hit. So we salute him. The Masters gets underway this week. I love when there's animosity and acrimony and just open hatred among players in golf. Isn't that the greatest?
Yeah.
You don't see it too often, right? You'll see two guys that despise each other. Tiger and Phil paired up in the final grouping at Doral many years ago. And they're in a toe-to-toe bloodbath all the way around, all 18 holes before Tiger finally pulls the thing out. And you knew that Steve Williams just wanted to pace Mickelson right in the balls with a 9-iron. Every time that Phil stroked a shot, it wouldn't have been surprising if at some point, Williams himself had a megaphone as Phil was in the middle of his backswing and screamed out, "Miss it, fatso!" One of my favorite things, if you're a heckler on a golf course. You don't get the opportunity to do that too often because it looks like a lot of these guys still need to have a sandwich here and there. But miss it, fatso, one of my favorite ways to harass a golfer. Works when you're out there with your recreational group. But we have the Masters, and that means the Live Tour, which was just here in Miami. I saw 4 or 5 people out there actually watching this thing at Doral, Lubie. Do you know who won? Do you know who was in it? I mean, where are these guys? If you wanted to go, 2 ways to disappear: witness protection or join the Live Tour. You could be the biggest, most famous, and recognizable celebrity, a John Rahm with a worldwide following. And nobody knows you're the fucking, whether you're fucking alive anymore. It's amazing, Lubie. Live Tour. But anyway, that's happening this week. The Masters cranks up. Hello, friends. Is it only a matter of time before we hear Iron Eagle saying that? Nice job, Iron Eagle, on the Final Four and the championship game. Coming up tonight, our good friend. So the Masters gets underway this week. And, it lends itself to wild betting opportunities. But I have no idea what to do with the Live Tour players because what we don't even know, like I said, you wouldn't know they were alive. Where's Greg Norman? That should be the question of the week at the Masters. Where's Greg? Was he seen walking into Saudi Arabian embassies anywhere? Where the hell is this guy? He's disappeared. All right, great day being with you. Championship game tonight. You're saying what? Take the points, Purdue? Yeah, Purdue. Take the points, Purdue. So you got sucked into the bookmakers' web as they are daring you to go ahead and bet Purdue. And I don't know. I mean, Was UConn vulnerable in that game? Purdue didn't play well. I think that also would lend to guiding you towards a wager on Purdue plus 6.5 points. I'm going to go ahead and take the points tonight, Lubie. I'm with you. So we're probably burying everybody right up to the final game of the NCAA tournament with our ignorant predictions. The our Miami Marlins got a win yesterday over St. Louis. So they're now 1-9. Looking pretty good. We're looking pretty good, though, for the under for the season. They have to play above 500 ball. There's going to be a fire sale. Everybody on the team is having Tommy John surgery. In fact, instead of a physical, they just gave everybody Tommy John, all 25 guys before the season started. Said, hey, whoosh, let's start with a new roster. That's the way it's been going. So pretty confident that our season-long prop bet on the Marlins is going to end up paying some nice dividends at the end of the year. We'll see you guys in Las Vegas, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. As that's going to wrap up this Peel Yourself Off the Map Monday edition of the Morning Briefing. For Mike Lubie Lubitz, I'm Jeff DeForest. We'll see you next time here on NoFilter.net and Caffeine TV.